Hello, friends. Welcome to this history news for January. This is our second live stream. Welcome, welcome. I'm just seeing your lovely comments, your lovely faces. Good morning to some of you. Good afternoon to others. It's evening time here for me. It has just literally gone 8:30 in the evening here over in London. Before we kick off, I just want to show you what's arrived for me. Still wrapped in its plastic, very exciting. Yes, this is the exhibition guide from the Met exhibition. Fortunately, I had got some gift vouchers for Christmas because it was a little bit spenny, but I'm pleased to have it, and I'm very much looking forward to. I really enjoy doing that thing. When we used to have DVDs, no one uses DVDs anymore, do they? Well, we certainly don't. Our DVD player's broken. When we used to have DVDs, I used to enjoy doing that and taking the plastic off. So I'm very much looking forward to doing that with this book. And then, of course, cracking into it and giving it a good read. So I'm excited about that. Hello, everybody. It's lovely to have you all here. So we have got some updates, some new news, and also some more events and exhibitions. I'm quite excited to have a chat with you. I'm going to do it slightly differently from the way I did it last week because last week. I was about to say last month, but it was last week because Michael says, agrees with me, used to love splitting open a DVD. It was one of the small pleasures. And when my husband would bring home a DVD, if he would unwrap it, he knew better. The man knew better than to unwrap it without me first saying it was okay. So yes, we do have some updates, some new news, and some events and exhibitions. And this time, last time I put the whole article up on screen, and I wasn't really aware of how small that would come up in the viewfinder that I can see. So as usual, we have a opera pinboard pinned in the description box with all of the news articles that I'll be talking about today. And to make things clearer, to make it flow better, I have chosen excerpts from those articles and I've put them into a slideshow. So hopefully I will be able to see what I'm doing better and it will be clearer. We're still in some respects in a test phase. So we'll see what we like, see what we don't like, and we will go from there. Right, let us begin at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. We're going to start with the thanks. The articles from today came from Yvonne, Alicia, Mary, Andi and Anne. I'm incredibly grateful that you took the time to reach out with these various news articles. It really does mean ever so much that you think of me when you see them and decide that I would be interested and send them over. And I am indeed interested and love to share them in these episodes. So let's start with our first update. And what a shock! We're talking about the Parthenon marbles. I was sent this article that George Osborne wants to return the statues to Athens, but can he? And this is a great article because it talks about the legal challenges. So, as I say, Mandy, you are not late. We've only been going for 3 minutes. This is our first update. Welcome. And of course, this will be up as a replay as soon as this is finished. Once it, I think, needs to render, and then it'll be there. So you can watch it back, but you are not late indeed. So let's see the excerpts that I found in this. Behind the scenes, there are also politics at play. Most of the museum trustees are appointed by the British Prime Minister, although considering how frequently we seem to change those, who knows which one appointed the current raft of museum trustees. Anyway, the trustees then elect their chair. And last year, around the same time that Osborne's negotiations started, the Greek Prime Minister had tabled repatriation as an item for discussion at a Downing Street meeting with Boris Johnson. Well, we're now 2 more Prime Ministers deep since him. Whatever the backroom model of the British government, repatriation would not be possible without Osborne's positive support. This is true, even while the former Chancellor's motivation might not be entirely selfless. This is interesting. This is really interesting. He now, like Lord Elgin, has the chance to associate his names with the artworks in perpetuity. And that, I think, is a really fascinating thing, that whatever happens with the Parthenon sculptures, there's going to be legacy making at play. I'm of the opinion that I think we're probably going to see the Parthenon sculptures repatriated in some way, shape, or form. Although the next news item I'm going to look at may throw that into question. I am of the belief, maybe it's a forlorn hope, that they will be in some way returned to Athens. And in doing so, George Osborne is, of course, going to have his name irrevocably tied to them, isn't he? So there is legacy making at play. Equally, though, if he doesn't, then he's going to be the guy who doesn't. And I suppose for some people, that will be a positive legacy too. This potential personal ambition is not legally straightforward. So we have the fact, we've talked about this in the past, that the British Museum is formally a charity and that Osborne must put the best interests of the organisation before all else. He must account for any negative consequences flowing from repatriation. Equally, though, he must also clearly, therefore, account for any negative consequences from not repatriating, would be my assumption. It says here, although the museum will lose its prize exhibit and may have less visitors, the return of the marbles will generate intense press publicity and perhaps some goodwill around the world, perhaps the kind of goodwill that talks about reciprocal loans. And so those galleries can be filled with things, ever-changing exhibitions. Something that I'm seeing as a trend potentially in heritage is that visitors want to be frequent returners, but to do so, they want an ever-changing museum or heritage environment. They want to be hearing different stories. So if they come once a quarter, they want to know they're going to see something different. And there's an option here, I think, that if space is cleared, then, and if we're not just fervently holding on to something out of sheer bloody mindedness, then perhaps there might be some options to be creative and industrious in that way. We have once again the ethical and perhaps legal basis for the original British purchase is certainly doubtful. Lord Elgin received legal permission from local Ottoman authorities, but the most likely view is that in removing a very large number of sculptures over a sustained period, Lord Elgin went further than the original document allowed. We then hear that Lord Elgin sought new legal permission from the Sultan, sanctioning removal after the fact. And we can also potentially get into the morality, legality of an invading force being the one to sell off those items, and whose cultural heritage is it, and who has the right to ask for it back, and equally who has the right to sell it. Even accepting this, Osborne, we are told, cannot lawfully deaccession the Parthenon marbles. That means remove it from the catalogue because of this British Museum Act of 1963. That action would only be permitted if the objects are unfit to be retained. So what does unfit to be retained mean? Now, that could mean it's a copy, it could mean it's a poor copy, it could mean it's damaged. I think it also could mean, to my mind, something could be unfit to be retained if it is so morally questionable and so toxic that it brings the museum into disrepute. We hear that Osborne's plan is to find a way around, a loophole, if you will, that ownership is going to be kept by the British Museum and then the marbles rehoused in Athens. This is exactly what I was talking about last week, that it's a kind of nominal ownership, a long-term loan that means that the sculptures won't ever really be deaccessioned. They'll always be part of the British Museum's collection, but we're never seeing them again in the British Museum. The question then becomes, is that going to be enough for everybody? Ownership in everything but name for Athens, and ownership in name alone for us in the British Museum. Let's see where we are next. I'm seeing some comments come in. We're talking about, a video of mine, Bess Throckmorton, a pronunciation question. Hang on a second. Sharon, most museums rotate the works every few months unless it's an archive, which might not change. I think, yeah, there's some commonality that things do get rotated, not in a lot of British museums. I mean, certainly not the big national ones that I've seen. There is some very static galleries. I think that a big change happened at the V&A, but this was best part of a decade ago, when they redid the Renaissance and early modern galleries, their medieval and Renaissance galleries, and that was a whole reworking of display items. And once those things are in there, that's going to be like that for the next few years. Thank you, Dice, for the super sticker. That's very kind of you, and welcome as well. Thinking from the point of view of the actual safeguard of the marbles, is that taken into account? Well, there's a lot of question about how safe they are here. There has been a lot of comment about the fact that when they were first brought over here, they weren't particularly well cared for, that they were cleaned with corrosive substances, that any colour that was left on them was eroded away, scratched away, bleached away to make them look white, because that was the style that people wanted to see. And additionally, there's conversation about how secure and safe the galleries are, because there's been a leak in the galleries, and I'm not quite sure if or when that has been fixed. So we can potentially ask questions about how safe they are here. Additionally, I think that if you are going to repatriate something, part of the responsibility of repatriation is to ensure that you are giving techniques and skills that you have learned from holding on to those things, passing over that information to the rightful owners. If you have learned things about those finds through the process of holding them illegally, immorally, whatever it may be, then part of your responsibility is to then pass on that information in ways that can secure those for the future and for the benefit of humanity, would be my argument. Let's hop on. So it's a carefully constructed legal plan, we're here, but it could be a missed opportunity. Over the coming decades, pressure on the British Museum to repatriate other objects, such as the Benin bronzes and the Rosetta Stone, will probably grow. I mean, we are already seeing that. If this scheme marks any type of precedent, the British Museum will respond to other requests through similar backroom negotiations. The British government will keep the nature of its involvement both ambiguous and at arm's length. And this, the author of this article, I couldn't agree with more. It would be better to move forward in a spirit of transparency. It is still widely thought that deaccession is politically unpopular. But in changing times, that view may now be out of date. A bold government, which through special legislation took direct responsibility for repatriation, might find popular support. Just see, here we are. Tate's South. So the Tate's and the South Bank Centre, they certainly have standalone fitted out galleries, but they also have temporary exhibitions. So in most of the museums, particularly ones with gallery spaces, there will be temporary exhibitions that will change, but there will be standing galleries that won't so much. Most of the displays in the Alberta Provincial Museum are static with room for travelling temporary displays. Yes, very similar, absolutely. And one more from you, Sharon. The bleaching thing, were you only talking about the race aspect and the erasure of deeper skin tones in the art? No. These marble sculptures were, to my understanding, coloured, painted with skin tones, with hair colours, to show the clothing, to show that sort of textural thing. But as with such a lot of the way in which we preserve our history, the idea of stripping back that colour or potentially misconstruing it as later vandalism, and so thus removing it to clean it, seems to have been what's happened. I'm not sure if they knew that it was actually the original patina that was put on it deliberately, or if they thought it was some kind of later addition or perhaps even a later graffiti. But regardless, they removed it without a by your leave, to my knowledge. This one is another connected thing on the Parthenon sculptures, and this video, if you haven't seen it already, raised my blood pressure something chronic. This is the Culture Secretary talking about how the Parthenon sculptures belong in the UK. So all of these conversations that are supposed to be happening between George Osborne and the Greek Prime Minister, this backroom dealing, we are now flipping and getting a conversation that seems to categorically rule it out. Quotes from the interview include, and if you are calm enough, I suggest you watch it, that sending the sculptures to Greece, according to Michelle Donovan, would open a can of worms and be, quote, a dangerous road to go down. It would, quote, open the gateway to the question of the entire contents of our museums. Okay, I don't think it would. Not the entire contents, just the potentially looted and stolen bits. But and I'm of the opinion that museum collections should be questioned frequently. The way we interpret them, the way we hold them, the way we display them, the stories we tell with them. It should absolutely consistently be questioned. If we aren't questioning it, what are we doing? Miss Donlan's assertion that she will not change the law, which, quote, is in the right place, will, of course, rightfully be met with anger in Athens, because these talks have been going on since time immemorial, and I think that they felt they were getting somewhere, and this seems to be turning that car around. We are now hearing that she's apparently had several conversations with Mr. Osborne, and, quote, I think his view on this has been misinterpreted and certainly portrayed wrongly. He's not about to send them back, basically. That's not his intention. He has no desire to do that. There's also been this concept of a 100-year loan moved as well, which is certainly not what he's planning either. He would agree with me that we shouldn't be sending them back, and they actually belong in the UK, where we've cared for them for a great deal of time, where we allowed access to them. How good of us. I fear I can't comment too much for risk of being demonetized, but this feels to me very much like finders keepers. And also, why are we speaking out in this categorical way now, when in the past it's been a case that the British government has always said, well, it's up to the custodians of the collection at the British Museum. They have to follow the law, but ultimately it's up to them. Now all of a sudden it's a government matter. And I do wonder how George Osborne feels about this quote. Is this what he feels? Or has he just been railroaded and painted into a corner by a member of cabinet? Cabinet? Yeah, would be, wouldn't it? I don't. It's almost impossible to know whether this is based upon an actual conversation or not. Let's just have a brief interlude there. Brian, how am I? I am very well. I am very busy, and I'm enjoying that quite a lot. We've got quite a lot of teaching stuff happening for me in heritage settings. I'm loving doing the new lives. Of course, it does mean that I'm doing more prep stuff for the old YouTube, and I'm seeing you guys a lot more because I'm talking about it. I'm also going to try and do some more short form content because YouTube seems to like that, and I'm just feeling very experimental. I'm entering my experimental phase, and we'll see how we go. More questions. We should question what's in our museums, plus the finders keeper mantra will harm the UK. I agree. I absolutely agree. Beverly, doesn't saying that returning the artifacts that were stolen would result in empty museums kind of discount British history? Secondarily to the exploitation of other countries. I mean, I think when people, these are the same government officials that talk about how the history of England, Britain, these islands is about more than colonialism, and it is. But by saying that we don't want to give this stuff back because what we have in the museums, that's all the spoils of colonialism. So it make it make sense. Please make it make sense. Valerie, maybe you're clarifying something for me. For what you read, the pigment on the Greek and later Roman statues is a fairly recent find. How has the fact that they were brightly painted changed history, and especially art history? I think that, so what I think you're saying is that the knowledge that they were painted is a fairly recent discovery. So perhaps what was removed, may have looked like dirt or some kind of discoloration. So perhaps they weren't just scraping off vast swathes of paint. Generally, these kinds of bright coloured environments, which stretches all the way through to medieval and early modern buildings, it changes our relationship and understanding with the the worlds of the past. It forces us to question things like, certainly in later periods, the notions of things like dark ages, and having this knowledge of a really vibrant, brightly coloured place, of brightly coloured fabrics and paints, I think it enables us to visualize the world in which these people moved and worked and lived and made their lives. So for me, the visual culture of a place, of a time, is really important, as is the material culture, as is the literary culture. Of course, that's what I've based my career on: visual culture, literary culture, material culture. So I am biased, but I do think that having an idea of how brightly coloured things were is really important to understanding the experience of people in the past. Let's hop along. This is another update. Well, I'm putting it in with updates because I'm putting it in the repatriations corner. And this is a really brilliant article that's incredibly well laid out. It's a very long article, so I'm going to show you some of the highlights. I really suggest that if you're interested in this, that you go check it out. It will, of course, it's linked both in the description box. They are numbered, so as we've gone through the articles, it's, I believe, we're now number 3, and additionally, it's also on the Opera Pinboard. This is about how America's biggest museums have failed to return Native American human remains, and that is despite a change in the law. This is the 1990, the law I'm talking about is the 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. So we are talking about how there's been a legal change that human remains, native and indigenous human remains that were stolen due to the westward expansion of the 1800s and other forms of violence, these remains still exist in museum and institutional collections, despite the fact that there is a legal prohibition, a local legal framework in which they should and indeed could be returned. 10 institutions hold about half of the Native American remains that have not been returned to tribes. These include old and prestigious museums with collections taken from ancestral lands not long after the US government forcibly removed Native Americans from them, as well as state-run institutions that amassed their collection from earthen burial mounds that had protected the dead for hundreds of years. 2 arms of the US government, the Interior Department, which administers the law, and the Tennessee Valley Authority, the nation's largest federal-owned utility. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I really understand what those terms or departments mean. I don't really know what the Department for the Interior does. I have a vague idea, but I don't think I understand it as well as an American would. So I'm not going to speak to that in case I get it desperately wrong. But the Interior Department spokesman says that it complies with all its legal obligations and that its bureau, such as the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Land Management, are not required to begin the repatriation of, quote, culturally unidentifiable human remains unless a tribe or Native Hawaiian organization makes a formal request. So essentially what that seems to be saying to me is, we don't have to give it back to you if we can't identify it, unless you ask for it. But how are you going to ask for it if it's not been identified? Am I missing it? Does this feel like a catch-22 to everybody? Like we're not going to look at who these people were and what community they belonged to. But if you ask, we'll look into it. Not sure. So we are told that some of the nation's most prestigious museums continue to hold vast collections of remains and funerary objects, which could be returned. And I assume that is the acronym for the legal framework. We have Harvard University's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology in Massachusetts, the University of California, and the Field Museum that hold the remains of more than 1,000 Native Americans. The earliest collections date back to the 19th and early 20th centuries, where their curators sought to amass encyclopedic collections of human remains. ultimately, these ethnographic collections are, in large part, something that was used to support and to fuel things like eugenics. And the theory of race, first of all, being a thing, but also being something that could differentiate between human beings and be potentially a value judgment. And so not only is it the theft of ancestors and the holding of ancestors, but in the use of these individuals and their remains, it was used to support the theory that allowed the persecution of those people. So it does feel like insult upon injury to me. I'm just gonna hop that in there. So then 2010, the Interior Department gives a new rule. This provides a way for institutions to return remains without establishing a cultural affiliation between present-day tribes and their ancestors. But ProPublica, who is the publication that have put out this document, has found that some institutions have resisted doing so. There's questions of lack of funding, and also the fact that people who are not obeying the law aren't getting fined. So there's not really any punishment involved. So here we have some of the, I suppose, heavy hitters. The American Museum of National History has got at least 1,900 Native Americans, remains of Native Americans who've not been made available for return. Only 46% of their collection has been made available for return. Harvard, we're looking at 6,100 not made available for return. So only 39% have been made available for return. University of California, we've got 9,000 sets of remains not made available, making that 22% that have been made available. Did I just double that? I think I may have done that twice. There's also, I may have just copied that image twice then. I believe there's also some other university institutions that are expressed in similar ways. It doesn't make for very happy reading, I don't think. There's some discussions about whether DNA testing might have some way of identifying who these communities were, and possibly, but then we've had some discussion that DNA testing is expensive and that museums won't have the funds to do it. That's also true. I don't understand a lot about forensic anthropology, but maybe facial bone structure. I wonder if that will have the capacity to tell between indigenous communities, because I don't know it's necessarily know that forensic anthropology is that discrete in how it can differentiate between people. I'm quite happy to be wrong on that, but I suppose the question then becomes, who's keeping records? Do we have no idea where remains were taken from? Is it just a hodgepodge? In which case, that's very, very terrifying. Why they're not made available for return? It's a good question, Carol. I don't know. It may be about things like expense of figuring out where they need to go. It may be about this notion of floodgates opening is an odd thing. But I wonder if it's that. I don't know where the floodgate's going to go to. I don't know where they think the problem's going to be. I don't know why there is so much caginess about this. But then I'm not in charge of the museum or its collection, so I don't know why they're so anxious about it. I'd love to understand, but the other thing is they aren't telling us, so that's also problematic. Is that there is no transparency really about the thinking, apart from to say things like slippery slope and floodgates opening. So it's hard to know whether there is really some justification. I can't see how there would be, but maybe that's just me. So we have another call for repatriation. This one, not from a museum, from an auction house. I'm going to say allegedly because I have heard news that some of these auction houses can get a little bit litigious when you potentially comment on the fact that maybe their research isn't up for scratch. So we have here a Maori tribe is asking for the return of cultural artifacts that are currently being listed in a Sotheby's auction catalogue. So we are seeing that there is about to be an auction of 18th and 19th century artifacts. They are referred to as tonga, and if I've pronounced that wrong, I did try and listen on the Maori dictionary, so if I have pronounced that wrong, I do apologise. That they would like it to be returned to their ancestral owners. It's the Sotheby's objects are included in Emma Hawkins' A Natural World sale, and this is running through the 19th of January. And these holdings come from the UK art and antiquities dealer Emma Hawkins, who has helped countless collectors build their own Wunderkammer, eclectic cabinets of curiosities, drawing from different eras and cultures. I mean, I kind of thought that the Wonder Cabinet, the Cabinet of Curiosities, was, a peculiarly Stuart Georgian thing. I didn't think, but then I suppose the stupidly rich are probably doing lots of odd things that feel like they're from a bygone age, don't they? This is the whole question about private collections is another matter. So we have this one lot, which is a club, and it was a gift, and the gifted club comes with an inscribed thing which specifies, interestingly, how it should be stored and how it should be held. So we have on the one hand that it's definitely a gift, but the gift came with conditions, and that condition is that, quote, begging the admiral to accept it, the chief would only ask that it should not be allowed to pass out of his family. Now, being in an auction house means that it's definitely passed out of the family, and it's going to pass out of the family further. We may get into the topic of can a gift come with conditions? I think it's when it is somebody's cultural heritage, yes, it absolutely can. And when those conditions are no longer enforced, then I think we should discuss the fact that this has now breached those terms, and thus back it goes. Of course, we have the usual. There was also a quote from Sotheby's that they, of course, have done their research, and allegedly, of course, they have. Must say that. This is another one. I think I've made it clear. I'm going to make it clear again. I am of the belief that human remains should not be displayed. They should not be on public display, whether that is bog bodies, pharaohs, or indeed, quote, the Irish giant. This 18th century Irish man, famed for his exceptional height, has been on display. His bones have been on display in a cabinet for years, despite the fact that that was in direct contravention of what he wanted. So let's hop in. The Irish giant Charles Byrne. This young man, he died when he was only 22, has been on display at the Hunterian Museum in Lincoln's Inn Fields in central London. He has been on display despite his fervent and expressed wishes. He says that, so the person who has been looking into this, who has published articles on it, who has campaigned against his remains being removed from display, alongside the late great Dame Hilary Mantel, who wrote the fantastic Wolf Hall trilogy, among other things, they have been asking for the remains to be removed from public display. The Royal College of Surgeons has said that after 6 years, this museum be revamped, that now these remains will not be on display any longer. However, they aren't giving them up. They're keeping them in storage. Now, Byrne specifically is said to have wanted to be buried at sea. I think presumably in an effort to avoid continuing to be somebody who was viewed as a quote freak of nature. I mean, that was one of the ways that he could earn his money, displaying himself in life, but that was his choice, to be a quote fairground celebrity. That's not his choice in death. That was never his choice in death. He certainly didn't want, in 1783 when he died, as the newspaper at the time quoted, a whole tribe of surgeons pushing a claim for the poor departed Irishman, surrounding his house just as harpooners would an enormous whale. This is not what he wanted. He was clear. So not only should I think we've gone in a step in the right direction by taking the remains off display. I think, frankly, all human remains should be off display. If there is something of particular interest, we know that casts are good enough. We know that. People have been going to visit Dippy the Diplodocus in the Natural History Museum in London since before I was a child, since before I was born. People have been going having that picture taken. That is a cast. People don't care. We don't have to have human remains on display. It's not necessary. We could have casts if that is necessary. And I think also we need to increasingly be thinking about getting the permission of people to have casts of their skeletons, whatever else, taken in death. But yes, so I think that we need to go one step further. We will have to wait and see. I think we're a step in that direction, but there's more to do. As I said here, Burns' original wish was to be buried at sea. That's what he wanted, and that's what he should get. And I absolutely and completely agree with that. There is apparently, and I don't doubt this to be the case, a good video about Charles Byrne on the Ask a Mortician channel. I talked about her last week. If you haven't already, I mean, she's got an enormous platform, so I'm sure that you've certainly encountered her before you've encountered me. If you haven't already, go and check her out. Her famous corpses videos are absolutely fabulous and a perfect blend of history and the macabre. So I think, yes, check out that video on him, and let's keep an eye on what happens to his remains. I think what's potentially very likely is they're going to go into some back room where they're still going to be shown to curious medical students for centuries to come, which I don't know how I feel about. I do. Not good. I don't feel good about it. Oh, sorry, we've got a skip there. That's the Maori Club. I'm sorry, that should have been there. That's exactly what I was talking about. Sotheby's upholds the highest standards of the market and recognises the significant responsibility to conduct its business in a responsible and ethical manner with all global laws and regulations. That is the Sotheby statement in regard to that Maori Club. I must have got my slides mixed up. So yes, there was a quote from them. Probably important to get that in so that they don't try and sue. This is an update, not from a history news video. This is an update from a video that I made many moons ago on the Voynich manuscript. And I'm almost loath to talk about this because when I did make the video on the Voynich, since then I have had countless people come to me and tell me that it's been solved. After I first put it out, at least once a month, somebody had told me it was solved, and I got excited. It's not been solved. And until I see a peer-reviewed article telling me that it's been solved, and frankly, it will be all over the newspapers or certainly online news. Until that happens, I'm going to rely on the fact that somebody thinks they've solved it, and we will see. What we do seem to have had, as it's now made the press, is that we may have tracked where it was and how it got into the collection of Emperor Rudolph II. And it comes from a series of investigations into various payments. We have the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II buying an unnamed set of items for 600 ducats or gold coins. So, and that happens in between 1576 and 1612. So that is about 150 years after we think the Voynich was created. Now, we don't know who creates it. We don't know why. We don't know what it says. We don't know what it is. So when we talking about the Voynich manuscript, I can't tell you what it's about. It's got loads of pictures and a text that we don't recognize in it. I have got a video on it if you'd like. If you haven't seen that, if you'd like more details, just in my channel, search Voynich and it will come up. But we have potentially got the person who sold it, even though we haven't got these first 150 years of ownership. And that is in 1599, the physician Karl Weidmann sold a collection of manuscripts to Rudolf for 500 silver thaler, which is an amount cited in another record by its equivalent in gold, 600 florin, which is another type of gold coin. It refers to them being remarkable or rare books. They were transported in a small barrel. We hear that almost all of the emperor's money transactions were made in guilders or florin, with only a very, very few in thaler or ducats. So from the information in the Marcy letter that was just meant to be gold coins, which both florin and ducats are, so even if a deal was made with ducats or thaler, florins were usually used for the final transaction. In essence, they are reverse engineering it, and they're thinking that the Voynich manuscript was among a collection that was sold by this physician, Karl Weidemann. So the 600 gold coins mentioned in the letter is an extremely expensive price for a single book. So potentially they are saying that makes sense that the Voynich comes as part of a collection. And perhaps that's why we don't have it described, because it is part of a collection rather than a standalone book. We are told that Weidmann lived in the Augsburg house of the well-known botanist Dr. Leonard Rauwolf, I believe that's pronounced, and he started selling books to the emperor immediately after the death of Rauwolf and his widow, who both had no children. Now, interestingly, it has been suggested that there is some kind of botanical element to the Voynich. There's been many suggestions about what it is. So maybe there's a connection in that it's a botanist. We found that newly found archival material has revealed that Rauwolf owned a small collection of books. So the Voynich could be one of those books that Weidmann got his hands on and then sold to the emperor, because for sure it would already have looked valuable back then to a collector of weird and precious things like the Emperor Rudolf. So they are suggesting that potentially even 150 years after this text was created, we think, it may have been sold with nobody knowing what it was. So already we are in problems as to potentially figuring it out or decoding it. And people have attempted to decode it numerous times. I believe that it was even taken to Bletchley and put through the Enigma machine, and the code breakers at Bletchley could not do a sausage. Question on this: can we be confident that it wasn't a 19th century invention? I believe we can be fairly confident that the book itself, the paper and the binding, and maybe the ink, I did talk about this in my video, that it's not a more recent forgery. I am by no means an expert in how that stuff is dated. So if it is contested, perhaps it is slightly later, but I think 19th century is potentially too late. Let me see. Going a bit further up. Is there a similar channel to mine to do with art history, or would I be willing to work with an art historian? Yes, of course. I have done some art history in a way, because I did some work for my doctoral thesis. I started my doctoral thesis looking at a full-length portrait of Catherine Parr. But I was very much reading it as a text. And in fact, my next video going up on this channel is going to be an art historical investigation. What I don't understand is kind of chemical compounds, infrared, X-ray, dendrochronology. I very much read it for the messaging within it. I read it as a text, in effect. And now we are. Oh, hang on. Before we hop on, this is a theory on the Voynich. I think it was a monk on drugs, botanist indeed. Well, I mean, we know, don't we, that there was on occasion some very spicy wheat going around at different points, and there was some definitely some difficult bread to deal with. So it's entirely possible that this was some kind of lucid dreaming while on a form of mushroom. There's good art documentaries, partial to the Victorian one, Life in Portraits or something similar. Well, I will have to check that out. I'm not familiar. I will investigate. One that I loved, which was actually a fashion historian working on portraits, and that was what's it called? Oh my goodness. It's Amber Butchart's documentary, and it's a series where she creates the dresses in various paintings, and it's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. Spicy wheat, difficult bread, bad names. They could be. It's also me trying to not get demonetized by talking about the various psilocybin based mind-altering substances. And we'll move on. We'll move on in a sec. The babby is no longer a babby. He is a toddler, and he is very sure of what he wants, is what I will say. So that is a challenge. And you are correct. The documentary is absolutely a stitch in time, and it is phenomenal. And that's come up a few times. Thank you very much. I loved it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. So we're now on to the new news, and we learned that ancient humans had the same sense of smell as us, but different sensitivities. And the way they found this out is quite fascinating. So I think they approach it with the premise that Neanderthals have less access to deodorant and etc., so that it might be more pee-pee and stinky, smelly than a modern human would be prepared to tolerate. That additionally, if you are living a hunter-gatherer life, then having a nose for certain substances, particularly as they say, energy-rich honey, is going to be an advantage. There's now this study come out of Duke University, and it uses odor receptors grown in a lab dish to compare the sensibilities of three kinds of human. And this has come out in a journal called iScience. So I'm not going to pretend to know how this happens, but they've grown odor receptors, and then they are able to test how those odor receptors are working. And what they have found is that a humanoid species who lived from 30,000 to 50,000 years ago were less sensitive to odors than present-day humans perceive as being floral, but were 4 times better at sensing sulfur and 3 times better at balsamic, and were very attuned to honey. We don't know what they ate, but we believe there are reasons why this receptor had to be sensitive. Neanderthal populations, who were still around about 40,000 years ago and swapped a few genes with us modern humans, were 3 times less responsive to green, floral, and spicy scents, using much the same receptors as we have today. They may exhibit different sensitivity, but the selectivity remains the same. So what they're saying is the Neanderthal odorant receptors are mostly the same as contemporary humans, and a few that were different were no more responsive. Now, I'm wondering what this will inform us of as we go forward. I think it's very interesting that we have pretty much the same sense of smell, but it's just it was potentially more sensitive in some directions. I will, if and when more explanation as to what that means comes out, I will of course share it in another update. A sacrificial pit containing jade artifacts has been found in China. We have found this sacrificial pit, we are told, was discovered when a grave was being dug, and within it, jade and stone tools were found. And because of this, a series of excavations took place, which revealed a Neolithic settlement that dates from between 5,300 to 5,800 years ago. It's filled with baked clay bricks, stone tools, several remains of bones, and it's thought that it's where the Neolithic inhabitants likely burned jade as part of a ceremonial sacrifice. They've also found over 400 artifacts, including beads, bracelets, combs, and jade accessories. And I think the image that we saw at the front is this one, the large Chinese arc-shaped jade artifact known as a huang. And if I pronounce that wrong, I do apologize. It's the largest such item to be found at a Chinese archaeological site from the Neolithic period. They've also found a dragon-shaped jade object. In terms of the value of this, we are told that the variety and fragility of the jade that's been unearthed here has rarely been seen at other sites, and it demonstrates outstanding craftsmanship and a rich spiritual world of those who lived there. And it's hoped this will consolidate the site's landmark status in studying early civilizations. And we are being told that it is the start of unfolding 5,000 years of Chinese civilization. So what I'm taking from that is more work is ongoing, more research, which is very exciting. Sarah, thank you ever so much for the super sticker. That's very kind of you, and I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. One thing on smells here, going back, I have a dear friend that had, but I think this is to do with long COVID and phantom smells, has had wrong smells. Oh, poop smells like air freshener. Oh no. My mum used to be able to smell if people were sick, like a bloodhound. It was weird. She told her boss once that he needed to see a cardiologist. Turned out he did as well, which is really actually, when you think about it, really creepy. Newly analysed 3,600 year old silver pieces are being presented as the first currency in the Levant. And this is fascinating because the Levant is a really central part of trade. And this is dating the use of currency, or a form of currency, 500 years before it was thought that it actually started. These are silver pieces. They aren't coins. I will tell you what they are referring to them as. So we have a picture of it. I'm just going to skip forward. So we have these silver, it's called hack silver, and it seems to be that they are weighing up the value of silver to exchange it. And this is happening 1,700 years before the Common Era, 500 years earlier than first thought. And what this means is that people in the Levant are using scales to weigh out currency. This is the use of precious metals as opposed to barter and exchange. So it's changing the way in which commerce is taking place. It means that you have to be able to write down transactions. It means that you're engaged potentially in bookkeeping. It also means that there is a supply of this silver that can become hack silver going through the country. So it's going to change the way we understand the history of trading. I'm seeing in the comments, can we just not talk about people's faith? Either way, I think it's going to cause an argument and a fight. So let's not talk about faith. Thank you very much. I don't want to have to prevent people from commenting, but I don't want to talk about religion. Thank you very much, because I think people will get upset, and there's no need for that. It's all right. It's all right. So as we say here, the silver hoards are what are called hack silver, which means coins, silver pieces that have been cut to specific weights. And we think there's been multiple hoards of this hack silver discovered throughout the Holy Land, wrapped in pottery or fabric, that potentially points to it being widely used. Interestingly, the biblical currency of the shekel is originally a weight measurement. So a shekel is, according to the Babylonians, 16.83 grams, presumably of silver. So biblically, I said let's not talk about religion, but we are going to talk about a part of religion here. Apparently, the way that Abraham pays for the cave of the patriarchs is that he weighs out 400 shekels. So is this biblically what that looks like? Pieces of that coming up to that weight, which I think is really, really fascinating. This is interesting as well, that hacked silver is often overlooked by archaeologists because it's unattractive or ugly. And I wonder if that's the case. People think that it's some kind of detritus or trash, that if they pulled this out of the ground, they might just think it's almost like a waste pit for somebody doing silver manufacture. This is one of the things that's so vital, is that you need to have a potential context for what you're pulling out of the ground, because I think that's quite right, is that it is fairly ugly. But also, these irregular lumps of silver, I agree, can reveal just as much, if not more, about daily life in the ancient Levant. And it might not look good in photos, but I think it's a pretty cool tale. We have got a new royal tomb in Luxor, and I can't read much of that. That's quite small, so I'm going to get in. I'm going to move my microphone forward. Pardon me, that might have caused a little bump. I apologised. Egypt's tourism ministry announced on Saturday the discovery of a new royal tomb in the West Bank of Luxor, where many Egyptian royal tombs are found. This tomb was discovered by an Egyptian-British team conducting an excavation mission in the Valley of the Kings and Queens in the West Bank in southern Egypt. The bank is where the iconic tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered over a century ago. Let's pop back to hack silver. Lots of Viking and Saxon hoards are basically hack silver. I think that's clearly there. And there, of course, there are kind of coinage involved as well. But I think that the storing up of hoards of jewelry, and it's important to think about the fact that in a world before banks, you wear your movable wealth in your clothing and jewelry. So in times of trial or problems, burying that stuff in the ground to come back and get to later is almost the version of a safety deposit box, I would say. We are being told that, unsurprisingly, this new tomb is very important. I think that whenever we find a new Egyptian tomb, it's going to be pretty important. It dates back to the 18th dynasty, known as the Tutmosid dynasty, which spans between 1550 to 1550 or 1549 BCE to 1292 BCE, and this is the dynasty that Tutankhamun is a part of. They think it's a female, potentially a queen or a princess from that dynasty, and we still, as it hasn't yet been fully archaeologically documented, what that's telling me is that we are at the very, very early stages of understanding what this is, and there is loads more work to be done. I think it's very important that we are hearing that, yes, it's a joint team, but importantly, part of that joint team is Egyptian, and that it seems to be the way things are going in the Valley of the Kings, that excavations now taking place in Egypt are being undertaken with the collaboration and involvement of professionals from Egypt, which I think is absolutely vital. Margaret says it's incredible that tombs still being discovered in Egypt. I think absolutely it is, and I would love to. I know that there is a reason as to why that is, and it's things about sort of hiding and destruction of various dynasties, trying to erase the stories of the past, and various alterations in, I believe, Nile River basins and all of that kind of stuff that's meant that these shifts and these hiding away have happened. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Right. We have an unprecedented discovery of what may be the remains of a Roman era mausoleum. And this has been found in France. We're told again, it's unprecedented discovery, and it's being found in Auvergne in France. And what they have found, this has been found because once again there was going to be some roads made. So a lot of these finds that are being made, particularly that I've seen made in Europe, is that somebody's building a development or a new road, and so the archaeologists come in to make sure that there's nothing of worth that needs to be saved. And what they found is 2 buildings with a partially legible plan. So they've got a rough idea of where they are and what they do, with 2 others represented by walls with tiles bound in lime mortar and a pipe network. The northwest segment of the plot houses a large pit. Interesting. 21 sandstone blocks have also been found, and they were cleaned and found to be adorned with bas relief. The most representative of these reliefs, according to the team, is a frieze fragment which measures 27 by 7 inches, which portrays Triton, Greek god of the sea, arms spread, hair long, tentacles ending in palm leaves, flanked on his right by a horse, possibly a seahorse, with only its 2 front legs visible. Interesting. The combination of this frieze with the conical spire with scales recalling a sea god and ornate cornice have led researchers to associate the finds with mausoleums that were constructed. I'm just going to make this big so I can see it better if I can. Constructed in the 1st and 2nd centuries. The motif depicting a figure from Greek and Roman mythology, in particular, symbolizes the journey of blessed individuals into the afterlife. We are told this is certainly not the tomb of ordinary mortals. So interesting where that's going to be. And yes, DC question says a seahorse, question mark, with legs. I'm wondering, to my mind, that's a centaur version of a seahorse. So is it a centaur arms and a seahorse body, or potentially is it, as Jessie is saying here, a seahorse with front legs and the back of a mermaid? I could not find a picture of the frieze they are referring to. If/when that does become available, it will be in the next update. But isn't that fascinating? We have here the uncovering of a Kurgan tomb from a previously unknown culture. This has been found the remains of 50 bodies with numerous grave goods in a large rectangular pit. We think the tomb has a wooden roof and would have been destroyed by land clearance. And it dates from 2,000 years ago and belongs, they think, to an unknown Scythian type culture. They found tools, sacred artifacts, weapons. All of these things would have been used as grave goods to help, they think, people on their journeys into the afterlife within the tomb. So there are miniature symbolic bronze daggers and battle axes, knives, mirrors, needles, drinking and eating vessels, bronze beads. Plaques are found, one of which features a stag, which I've got a picture of coming up next. And the archaeologist says this is a common theme in prehistoric Siberian Scythian art. The term Scythian does not specifically refer to any one thing. And we have here bronze weaponry, horse riding gear, art featuring real and mythical animals, mainly stags, wild felines, birds of prey, and mythical griffins. It's thought that the site served as a family tomb for generations when it was then sealed off and set on fire. The colour of the soil within the mound suggests the site was exposed to high temperatures. The researchers suspect that when the tomb was filled with bodies, no more space existed, sealed off, set on fire, left to burn, becoming a kurgan burial mound. This is the bronze stag badge found in the burial mound, and they think they have called the culture the Tagar or the Tagar culture, and archaeologists are saying that this should be classified as a separate culture because of the artifacts and burial practices discovered at this Kurgan mound. And Marcus says, I can't wait for more info on this. Me neither. I think that's going to be exciting to find out, both this and indeed the thing we looked at before with the weird, did you just say the name of it? Is this what it is? A hippocampi. Is that what it is? Excellent. Excellent. Let's investigate that later. So I was about to say that Margaret says, what part of the world is this unknown culture? So it's a kurgan in this region found in the Asian steppes and mostly associated with the Tagar culture, usually consists of an earthen tumulus built over a tomb containing a single corpse, grave goods, and horses. So wherever in the Asian steppes this was found, I will see if they have an exact location. It wasn't in the article that I saw, but let me see if I can find what it said it was. So it's, I'm going to have a look and see if I can find the exact location that it said it was found in. So it's archaeologists from the Siberian Federal University. The site, apart from saying Siberia, Russia, which is a fairly broad location, and maybe that's because they don't want people to kind of go a grave robbing, but Siberia. Researchers discovered what's inside a medieval pendant using neutrons. And once again, I'm not going to pretend to know the science behind this, but they scanned the pendant. They didn't want to open it. They scanned the pendant with a neutron beam, and this is the image that they've produced. I don't know how that works. Clearly different from an X-ray. I'm not going to pretend to understand the science. But what's interesting to me is that this work, which was carried out using tomography and prompt gamma activation analysis, say that 5 times, allows you to scan the interior of the pendant. It also has revealed to them, so it's much, much clearer than an X-ray, because it allowed them somehow to find out that what's inside are 5 individual packets made of silk and linen with bone splinters packed in each. Now, I don't know any other technology apart from whatever this is that could tell you that. I could be completely wrong, but I think that this is something to do with the way that whatever this is works, that it tells you what the stuff is. And they think that the bone splinters were religious relics, which I think is a fairly safe assumption. And we have this reconstruction of what the pendant may have looked like with obvious religious symbols upon it. What they can't tell us, they can tell us a lot, but they can't tell us who these bone splinters are from. It's assumed it's from a saint. I think that's a fairly good shout. But usually there'd be a strip of parchment inside telling the name of the saint. As they're not prepared to open it, they can't see whether that exists. And if they did open it, they might find that it was no longer extant, which would be a terrible waste for them to open it and thus destroy it and then not have the answer as it was. So what an amazing thing, and these new technologies that are allowing non-invasive ways to find out what's going on. We are told there's only 3 other known relic containers of this type, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce that word. Phylacteries, let's go for that, which is derived from a Greek term for safekeeping or protection, usually worn around the neck. exterior of the gold-plated pendant made of copper shows Jesus, the 4 evangelists, Mary, and 4 female saints in enamel. It's been dated to the late 12th century, and they have placed it as coming out of a workshop in Hildesheim in Germany. And what is very exciting for those who are close by to the General Doctorate for Cultural Inheritance at the State Archaeological Directorate of Mainz is that this can be viewed in the medieval exhibition at the Mainz State Museum. So if you are near there and you get a chance to have a look, do comment and tell us what you think of it. And if you get some pictures, if you're allowed to take some pictures, please send them my way. That sounds very exciting. Marianne says I pronounced that well. That's excellent. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased that I got that one right. I'm always worried about pronunciation. This is an article that was part of JSTOR, and it's essentially a question of where research in art history is going next. So we have the title, "The Renaissance Lets Its Hair Down." And here is the argument. Human hair has been the subject of countless cultural tangles over the centuries. The protein filament has been included in definitions of the civilized and the savage, the modest and the vain, of the chaste and the sensual, the orderly and the anarchic. Above all, hair has been intimately written into definitions of sexuality and gender. Biology makes hair grow, unless it doesn't, but culture asks how long, how short, how styled, how visible, how hidden. And the person who's undertaking this work, who's looking into it, on which this smaller article is based upon, has noted that interest in hair has until recently remained on the margins of history. And I think the way it's being shaped is that may not be the way it's going to go going forward. And I think that's very interesting. We're going to start thinking about the way in which hair is portrayed, discussed, both in paintings, sculpture, but also in text, in plays, in poetry. What is hair doing and why, and what does it tell us about the cultures, what they aspire to be and what they seek to avoid? We've been talking about DNA, and we have some DNA tests from a colonial cemetery in South Carolina. This colonial era cemetery is discovered in 2013, and there has been a genetic analysis of individuals that have been found within. And the findings are as follows: that people enslaved during the 18th century in Charleston, South Carolina, were kidnapped from all across Africa and denied the chance to be buried with kin. Of the 36 skeletons discovered, only 18 provided DNA samples sufficient for tracing their origins. And that's one of the things when people talk about DNA testing remains, it has to be in very certain condition to be able to get sufficient DNA sampling to sequence the full genome and thus be of any real use. But we hear that all but one of them had predominantly African ancestry. By comparing these people's genomes with reference samples, the research discovered that 12 likely had ancestors from West or West Central Africa. 5 had ancestry from Sub-Saharan Africa, and 1 had ancestry from both West Africa and the Americas. Further, the high levels of the element strontium in their teeth, which came from the water they drank as youngsters, told the researchers that 13 people were not from Charleston, but that they were likely born and raised in West Africa. The community also wondered whether the Anson Street ancestors, which is the name of the people given to the people that were found in this cemetery, were related to one another. Quote, "The results revealed no autosomal kinship among the individuals analysed, meaning that they were not close biological kin. This finding is consistent with other ancient DNA, quote, findings from enslaved African individuals, reflecting the nature of structural violence experienced in enslavement." So we learned that the Anson Street ancestors were to be reinterred in 2019, and that they were given names by the local community of Charleston. This is something that's happening, and I'm presenting it because I would like to give a warning for people who might think this is a good idea. I know none of you will, because you're all wonderful people. Exasperated residents have asked people to stop coming searching for Nazi treasure in a Dutch village. This has been triggered by an old map that has been made public by the Dutch National Archive only last week, and it turns out that has made people go buck wild. So the 75-year-old confidentiality period declassified the map. I'm not going to show it here, just in case of further nonsense happening, but it sounds like it's making people's life a misery. People are having individuals turn up in their back gardens, knock on their doors, all hours of the day and night. There's metal detectors all over the shop. It just sounds like a bit of a nightmare. Somebody talked about how they found a hole that came up to their belly button or their chest that somebody had dug in their back garden. So there is some shenanigans happening in this Dutch village, and I feel incredibly sorry for the individuals. But it's because they think that ammunition boxes full of diamonds, rubies, gold, and silver may be found. Now, before this map was released, the Dutch state did try and dig the treasure up, which they didn't find it, or if they did, they're keeping it very, very quiet. So if they couldn't find it, what makes you think you can? Here we have one of the holes in my garden came up to my chest, that people have popped up outside her window wielding microphones. Her neighbours have been woken by strangers with flashlights strapped to their forehead. Can you imagine? You'd just be livid. And if you're going to do this, they're saying, please stay away from other people's property. But on top of that, they are walking through a part of Europe that was under heavy bombardment and as a site of aggression during World War II. And thus, there is a risk that these excavators might hit unexploded grenades, bombs, or landmines. And for that reason, metal detectors had been banned. So, I understand. We all think that Indiana Jones. Well, no, actually, we don't, do we? We don't think that Indiana Jones is an aspirational tale. If you're going to go out looking for treasure or finds or whatever it may be, I think that being a metal detectorist is a great hobby. We found some incredible things. Amateur metal detectorists have found some of the most interesting finds that I've looked at across the news in the last little while. But let's tell all of our friends, because I know that none of you are doing this because you're all far too sensible. Let's tell all of our friends that if you happen to be in a part of Europe where the World War II was a heavy job, don't go poking in the ground, because you might find very old but still very live munitions, and that is not a good idea. And on top of that, Marcus, you are quite correct. Don't be presumptuous in other people's yards. Don't do that. Property boundaries should always be respected, and especially if there might be landmines on them that no one knows about. No one wants their foundations blown up because you're trying to find gold and diamonds and rubies that probably aren't even there. And this is, I believe, one of the last new news updates. And I'm not quite sure what I think of this. That the Natural History Museum has come under fire for one of its gagging clauses in a contract with one of its sponsors for art galleries. So this has been an ongoing sponsor for their wildlife photography of the year competition, starting back in 2016. And in the contract, there was, quote, a stipulation that barred the institution from making, quote, any statement or issuing any publicity which may reasonably be foreseen as discrediting or damaging the reputation of the company sponsoring it. Now, the company sponsoring it does have a past of oil excavation and not a particularly green initiative. One photograph in the 2016 edition of the exhibition shows cormorants darting among fish below an oil rig. And the caption, they are saying, is somewhat questionable. The text is supposed to say that drilling for oil is not generally considered beneficial for wildlife yet oil rigs can provide shelter and a rich food supply for many animals, including Brandt's cormorants. Oh, I mean, that doesn't sound good. I'll be honest with you. In 2020, the contract was renewed, but the company that is doing the funding has divested its fossil fuels and is now focusing on renewable energy. So it is making steps in the right direction. I would also point out that Wildlife Photographer of the Year does have and has had incredibly powerful photographs about things like deforestation, the evils of palm oil, the risks of climate change. It's not been, in the ones that I've seen, it's not been shy about confronting the issues of deforestation, palm oil, climate change, fossil fuels, poaching. I've seen all of that in the exhibition. So I don't like it, but I don't know how. And the Natural History Museum has said, quote, "We retain absolute editorial control over all our exhibitions. Any suggestions sponsors have influence over the content we share is categorically untrue." So potentially this text on the cormorants was the Natural History Museum's choice. It's a weird choice. I'm going to give you that. It's a weird choice. But I have seen them post some really hard-hitting captions alongside other artworks, other photographs, really brutal stuff. So I don't know on this one. Clauses such as this, we are told, are standard for corporate partnerships, but can be open to misinterpretations with regards to the absolute editorial control we retain. We no longer include them into the new agreements. And as it says, that the WPY, Wildlife Photographer of the Year series, quote, has raised awareness of the consequences of our actions on the planet for almost 60 years and continues to document the damage from plastic pollution and deforestation to the devastating impact of fossil fuels. And I have to say that as somebody who has been into WPY on numerous occasions, that is certainly something that I have seen consistently playing out in the photography and in the captions around the photography and in the way they are collected. Like, I used to refer to it as the wall of misery, where you turn a corner and be like, oh boy, and it was just boom, 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 right, hit you about how atrocious humanity's influence on the world and nature is. Representatives for Orsted, I think it's pronounced, did not immediately respond, but they did tell The Guardian, quote, that they would not seek to influence the Natural History Museum's views or limit its ability to provide its usual high standards of independent, critical, fact-based commentary on any aspect of the energy industry sector, should it choose to do so. What I will say is that the Natural History Museum is one of the museums that is funded by the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And they do have axes to grind. And I know that from other institutions and people that work there, that in the past, there have been phone calls made about collection items and interpretation. So this level of control and risk about losing funding has been allegedly passed on from our government to these institutions. So I don't love the sponsors for potentially having that influence, but let's not forget that the government absolutely does. And recently they have been throwing their weight around about it. So now we are hopping into events and exhibitions. This is our last section, friends. This is a story about the Frick adding its first early modern portrait of a woman to its collection of old masters. And isn't she an absolute beauty? Look at I wish I could make this bigger, but that sort of silk brocade is just absolutely gorgeous, as is the ruff. Just what a beautiful piece, absolutely beautiful piece. It's titled Portrait of a Woman. It's very much a say what you see kind of affair, and it comes from around 1575. The work of Giovanni Battista Moroni, and it was donated to the museum in following its appearance in 2019. It's one of only 15 portraits that this artist did of a woman sitting on her own out of about 125 extant works in the genre. And it's being referred to as a triumph, painted at the height of the artist's career. And I can certainly see, I mean, even not being able to see it in person, even that small image, what a gorgeous, beautiful thing. We are told, though, that the Frick is currently closed for an ambitious expansion project, which, of course, when that's reopened, I will let you know. This painting is currently on view at a temporary location in is that Brewer building? I may have mispronounced that. Americans, please do let me know, or anyone who knows or Brower building, which is the former home of the Whitney Museum of American Art. And it's going to be making its debut there, I believe. So it's either last Thursday or this Thursday coming. So that is very exciting. If you do get a chance to go and check that out, let us know your thoughts. Let us know how it looks in the flesh. I'm sure even more beautiful. For those in the UK, particularly with plans to be in Scarborough before the 19th of February, do head down to the Scarborough Museum and Galleries for this From Local to Global exhibition. As you can see, it's probably going to have some fairly upsetting themes, and indeed there is a content warning so here is what the exhibition is about, and we have a content warning at the end which says, please be aware that this exhibition explores a collection of objects that contain images and descriptions of racial exploitation. We have included this. I can't see that because it is in the way. Let me see if I can make it bigger and see what it says. We have included this material because it helps us better understand British attitudes towards race that come from colonial past. What I believe it means our colonial past. We'll try to approach the material sensitively, but visitors may find some elements upsetting. We're told that Scarborough Museums and Galleries, like other organisations in this country, has benefited from colonialism. The donation of the Harrison collection is one example of this. They say a collection like this can act as a springboard to explore multiple perspectives, some that have always existed but have been marginalised by British colonial thinking. So if that's of interest, then that is available to you until, let me just remind you, the 19th of February, so just over a month to go. The Casa dei Veti in Pompeii was reopened after 20 years. The article that's linked on this is a selection of pictures from the interior of this Pompeii house. They are beautiful, gorgeous things. So do make sure you check that out either on the opera link or indeed in the description box. Check out those images. If you're planning a trip to Pompeii, you've got an added bonus. You've got a Brucey bonus, as we used to say when I was a child in this country, of things to check out. And last but by no means least, I want to say this is the last slide. And yes, I am correct. Last but by no means least, we have an event or exhibition from the National Archives. This opened on the 5th of November last year. Fittingly, remember the 5th of November, Gunpowder, Treason and Plot, and it will remain open until the 6th of April 2023, and it's exploring treason in the archives, so documents and stories relating to famous traitors and famous treasons. I think I'll be checking this out. So I've got so far my plans for the next exhibitions that I'm going to go and see. I'm going to go and see the exhibition at the Docklands Museum, Museum of London Docklands, on executions, and I'm going to make my way to the National Archives at Kew to go and check out the exhibition on treason. So I'm going to have a happy old time. Right, that is what I have for you, friends. I do hope that you have enjoyed this hour and a half. What I love is how I said to myself, I'm going to go live because I'm going to go live more regularly, because then we will be able to do loads of news in a really fast way. But actually, I love this. I've had a great time. I've had a great time looking at your comments and your questions and seeing conversations in the chat. So thank you all so much. And I think we'll probably be back next Monday, depending on what news comes my way. If not, we'll be in the Monday after. But I will certainly be back for a pre-recorded video on Friday. That will be going live at 4 p.m. GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, and it will be going live as a premiere. So I'll be typing away in the chat of that, having conversations with you all there too. So whatever your plans are for the rest of the day, however much you have left of it, I hope it's a wonderful one. I also hope that you have a lovely rest of the week, and I will see lots of you, I hope, on Friday. So do take care of yourselves, and I look forward to speaking to you all in the next one. Bye-bye for now.